Lesson 2, Life in Egypt. Egypt was unified from two kingdoms into one country in 3150 BC. These kingdoms, one was in Upper and the other was in Lower Egypt. Both kingdoms had their own kings. These kings even wore their own special crowns. The king of Upper Egypt wore a white crown, and the king of Lower Egypt wore a red one. When the two kingdoms were unified, or united into one country, the two different colored crowns were unified into one crown. Here you can see the white is the Upper Egypt crown, the red is the Lower Egypt crown, and then the red and white one to your right here is when Egypt was unified. Here's a map. So right here we see Upper Egypt and then Lower Egypt because the Nile goes up right here and is let out. Legend says that King Menes led his army north into Lower Egypt wearing the double crown. No one is certain if this is true. Some historians believe that other kings named Scorpion could have united the two kingdoms. But this is the story that's gotten passed down. Egyptian records. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone allowed archaeologists to decode hieroglyphics. We know about the pharaohs because of the records Egyptians kept. Like the Sumerians, Egyptians developed a form of writing based off pictures called hieroglyphics or sacred carvings. Unlike Sumerian cuneiform writing, their hieroglyphics represented objects or ideas, but also stood for sounds. They could be carved into clay or stone or written on paper. Archaeologists did not know how to read the hieroglyphics. They found an Egyptian building and artifacts. They couldn't read them for a long time. But the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 solved the mystery. On the stone was a passage written in Greek Egyptian hieroglyphics and a form of Egyptian cursive writing. By comparing Egyptian hieroglyphics to Greek words, the Rosetta Stone could be read. Now we know that the Egyptians used at least 700 different hieroglyphic symbols. So here is the man that found the Rosetta Stone and helped decode it. And then on the right, this is a picture of the Rosetta Stone. So on it, it had Greek and Egyptian writing, and they were able to decode it. Hieroglyphics. So once again, the Egyptians had 24 letters that they used, like an alphabet like we do, but they also had 700 symbols that each symbol stood for a word. And so here we see some examples of that right here. Pyramid building, mummification took 70 days. Because the afterlife was more important than life on earth, the Egyptians took great care in preparing kings for burial. They believed the bodies of the pharaohs needed to be preserved. They used a mummification process that took 70 days. First, the Egyptians removed all the organs except for the heart from the body. Then they rubbed oils and perfumes over the body. Next, they wrapped the body in linen bandages. And finally, the mummy, or the preserved body, was placed in a coffin and put in a tomb. If you see this picture here, you see all the different materials they used to prepare the body. Things like frankincense and onion and beeswax. The building of Egypt's largest pyramid began in 2600 BC. Giza is the Great Pyramid, and it was built for the pharaoh Khufu. Archaeologists and historians estimate that this pyramid took about 20 years to build and that slave labor was not used. Until the 1800s, the Great Pyramid was the tallest structure in the world, made by people. When the Nile was flooding, farmers could not work in their fields. They were available to work on the pyramid. So perhaps as many as 20,000 workers used more than 2 million blocks of heavy stone to build the pyramid. They would cut the gigantic blocks of granite from cliffs to the south. Then some believe they dragged the stone with a rope using ramps to the building site. And here are two pictures. We see it right here. We always see pictures of the pyramids and they're just out in the middle of the desert, but what we don't realize is that it's right next to a city. And then here's a better, closer picture of the pyramid. Social life. So Egyptians had a lot of different jobs. They also had a triangle or an Egyptian society with the king having the most rights and most power at the top. And then you would have had nobles and priests that were next. Merchants, craftsmen, and scribes followed. Then came farmers and unskilled workers. Another class level that was added later would have been prisoners or enslaved people that were captured in battle and then brought to Egypt. As enslaved people lost their complete right and were owned by another person. The Egyptians could move between classes if they worked hard. If they were born into one class, they did not have to stay there. And then speaking of this, Egyptian women had more rights than women in other ancient civilizations. They could inherit land and handle business transactions. Some Egyptian women may have even been scribes and merchants. And that's the end of lesson 2.